Hello, and welcome. Get comfortable. Adjust your pillow, pull up your blanket, and settle in for a long, gentle journey through history. Tonight, we're going to talk about something rather unremarkable in the best possible way. We're going to explore the history of night watchmen. These were the people who stayed awake while everyone else slept. The ones who walked quiet streets, checked that doors were locked, and made sure the night passed uneventfully. And most nights, nothing happened at all, which is exactly what everyone wanted. There's something rather peaceful about the idea, isn't there? While you drift off to sleep, knowing that someone, somewhere, is keeping watch. It's a feeling that goes back thousands of years. The comfort of knowing that someone is alert, so you don't have to be. Now, I should warn you, this isn't going to be an exciting story. Night watchmen, by their very nature, had rather boring jobs. Most of the time, anyway. They walked the same routes, night after night. They called out the same hours. They checked the same doors and windows. And the vast majority of the time, absolutely nothing was wrong. But that was the point. So let's begin at the beginning, as most things do begin, in the ancient world. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders relax. And we'll start walking these nighttime streets together, very slowly, very calmly, back through time. To understand why people needed night watchmen, we first have to understand what night was like in the ancient world. And here's the thing. It was really, truly dark. Not the kind of dark you might experience today, where streetlights glow orange through your curtains, or where your neighbor's porch light never quite turns off, or where the blue glow of someone's television flickers against their window at 2 in the morning. No, this was complete darkness. The kind that made you wonder if you'd gone blind when you opened your eyes. The kind where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The only lights were from fires, oil lamps, or candles. And these were precious, expensive. Not the sort of thing you kept burning all night, unless you absolutely had to. Wax cost money. Oil cost money. Even firewood cost time and effort to gather. So when the sun went down, most people went to bed. Not because they were necessarily tired, mind you, but because there wasn't much else to do in the dark. Reading? Difficult when you can barely see the page. Sewing? A good way to stab yourself with a needle. Walking around? An excellent method for stubbing your toe on furniture or tripping over things. In ancient Rome, which we'll start with because the Romans kept rather good records of these things, the night was divided into watches. The word watch comes from this practice, actually. Staying awake, keeping watch. The Romans called their night watchmen the vigiles. The word means wakeful ones, which is rather on the nose. But the Romans were practical people. Why call something fancy when you can just describe exactly what it is? The vigiles walked through the streets of Rome, carrying lanterns. These weren't bright electric torches, mind you. These were oil lamps that gave off a flickering, yellowish light that maybe illuminated 5 or 6 feet around them. Enough to see where they were stepping, enough to notice if a door was ajar. They carried long poles with hooks on the end. Now, you might think these were weapons, but no, they were for pulling down burning thatch from roofs. Fire was the great terror of the ancient city. Everything was made of wood and mud, brick and dried grasses. One stray spark, one knocked over lamp, and entire neighborhoods could go up in flames. So the vigiles walked, and walked, and walked some more. They walked the same streets every night, checking for fires that usually weren't there, checking for thieves who usually weren't there either. Most nights were blessedly, peacefully uneventful. The vigiles would walk their routes, call out the hours. We'll get to that in a bit. And then, when dawn broke, they'd go home and sleep, while everyone else woke up. There were about 7,000 vigiles in Rome at the height of the empire. That sounds like a lot, but Rome had a population of about 1 million people. So that's one night watchman for every 140 or so people. Not exactly comprehensive coverage. They worked in shifts, divided into cohorts and centuries, because the Romans liked to organize things militarily, even when they weren't in the military. Each cohort covered 2 of Rome's 14 regions. They had barracks where they'd rest between patrols. Small rooms with hard beds, where they'd catch a few hours of sleep before going back out into the dark streets. The work was not glamorous. Being a vigile was not a prestigious position. It wasn't something Roman citizens typically did. Instead, it was mostly freedmen, former slaves who had earned or bought their freedom, men who needed work and weren't particularly picky about what kind. They were paid, but not much. They received a small stipend, and they were exempt from some taxes. After 6 years of service, a vigile could become a Roman citizen if he wasn't already. So there was that incentive, at least. But mostly, they walked. In the rain, in the cold winter nights, when the wind came down from the Alps and made the streets of Rome feel like ice. In the suffocating heat of Roman summers, when the day's warmth radiated from the stones long into the night, they carried their lanterns and their long hooked poles, and they walked the same streets night after night after night. And most of the time, nothing happened. Which was, as I mentioned, exactly the point. Let's pause here for a moment. Take a deep breath. Feel yourself sinking a little deeper into your bed or your chair. We're in no hurry. Time moves differently in these stories. The vigiles walked slowly. We'll walk slowly too. Now, other ancient civilizations had similar systems, though we know less about them because they didn't keep records the way the Romans did. In ancient Egypt, temple guards kept watch through the night. These weren't the same as night watchmen exactly. They were protecting specific temples and the treasures within them, but the principle was similar. Someone needed to stay awake. The Egyptians divided the night into 12 hours, though these weren't the same length as our hours. Egyptian hours changed length depending on the season. A summer nighttime hour was shorter than a winter nighttime hour, because summer nights are shorter than winter nights, which seems confusing to us now, but apparently made perfect sense to them. Temple guards would mark these hours with water clocks, devices where water dripped slowly from one container to another, and you could measure time by how much water had dripped. The gentle sound of water, drip, 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 in the darkness. Peaceful, in a way. In ancient China, night watchmen walked through cities and towns, striking gongs to mark the hours. Different numbers of strikes for different times of night. The sound would echo through the silent streets, and people sleeping in their beds would know, without having to wake fully, what time it was. 5 gongs. Midnight. Still a long time until dawn. Turn over, adjust your blanket, go back to sleep. The watchman has things under control. These Chinese night watchmen, called gengren, or watchmen, also called out messages as they walked. All is well, the night is peaceful. Sleep soundly. It's rather nice, isn't it? Someone walking through the dark, telling everyone who might be half awake that everything is fine, that there's nothing to worry about, that they can relax and drift back to sleep. The gengren carried lanterns too, red lanterns that swayed gently as they walked, casting reddish light on the stone streets. They also carried small wooden clappers, or sometimes bells, which they would ring to announce their presence. This served 2 purposes. First, it let people know that the watchman was there, doing his job. And second, it warned any potential troublemakers that the watchman was approaching. Most troublemakers, when they heard the clapper or the bell, would simply leave. They weren't looking for confrontation. They were looking for easy opportunities, an unlocked door, an unattended cart, something they could slip away with quietly. When they heard the watchman coming clack, 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 or ding, 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 they'd fade back into the darkness and try somewhere else, somewhere where no one was watching, and the watchman would continue his round, probably never even knowing that anyone had been there at all. Let's talk about the calling of the hours. Since I mentioned it, this was an important part of a night watchman's job, and it's one of those things that seems rather charming in retrospect, but was probably quite important at the time. Before everyone had clocks, and remember, for most of history, nobody had clocks. The only way to know what time it was at night was to listen for the watchman. He would call out, in a loud voice that carried through the quiet streets, 12 o'clock and all is well, or 2 o'clock on a cold morning, or sometimes just 3 o'clock. The phrasing varied by time and place, but the purpose was the same. Let people know what time it is. Let them know everything's fine. There's something almost meditative about it, isn't there? The same phrases, repeated night after night. The same route, walked again and again. The same calls, echoing through the same streets. 12 o'clock and all is well. 1 o'clock and all is well. 2 o'clock and all is well. A rhythm to the night. A structure to the darkness. Now we move forward in time, through the fall of Rome, through the chaos and confusion of the early medieval period, and into what we might call the high medieval era. The 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. Cities are growing. London, Paris, Venice, Florence, Vienna. Places where thousands of people live close together, in narrow streets and wooden buildings that lean toward each other across alleyways. And at night, these cities become very, very dark. There are no streetlights, of course. Some of the wealthier households might hang a lantern outside their door, but this is expensive, and most people don't bother. The streets are lit only by whatever moonlight makes it down between the buildings. And on cloudy nights, or during the new moon, that means practically no light at all. This is when the medieval night watchman becomes an essential part of city life. In England, they were often called bellmen because they rang bells as they walked. In France, they were gardes de nuit, or night guards. In Germany, Nachtwächter. Same job, different languages. Their duties were simple and repetitive. Walk through the assigned streets, call out the hours, check that doors are locked and shutters are closed, look for fires, listen for anything unusual, and most importantly, be visible, or at least audible. Let people know that someone is awake and watching. Medieval night watchmen typically worked from dusk until dawn. That could be anywhere from 10 to 14 hours, depending on the season. In winter, with its long nights, that was a very long shift indeed. They dressed warmly. Heavy woolen cloaks, thick boots, sometimes a hat or hood. They carried a lantern, almost always. Usually an enclosed lantern with glass or horn panels, so the wind couldn't blow out the flame. They also carried a staff or a halberd, a long pole with a blade on the end. This was partly for protection, but mostly it was to help them walk. Medieval streets were not smooth. They were cobbled, if you were lucky, muddy and rutted, if you weren't. A staff gave you something to lean on, to steady yourself when you stepped in a hole or on a loose stone. The night watchman's route was carefully prescribed. He walked the same streets every night, in the same order. There was a comforting predictability to it. Down Bread Street, where the bakers would already be awake and kneading dough for the morning's loaves. The warm smell of yeast and flour drifting out into the cold night air. Past the church, its stone walls dark and silent. Through the market square, empty now, except for a few stray dogs nosing around for scraps. Down to the river, where the bridges needed to be checked. Were the gates locked? Was anyone sleeping rough underneath the arches? And then back up through the residential streets, where everyone was asleep, or at least trying to be. Every hour, the watchman would call out. 1 o'clock, a cold night, all quiet. His voice would echo off the walls and cobblestones. Inside their houses, people would hear it without quite waking. A reassuring sound. Someone is on duty. Someone is alert. Go back to sleep. In some cities, there were watchtowers or watchhouses. Small buildings where the watchmen could warm themselves by a fire for a few minutes before heading back out into the cold. These watchhouses were simple affairs. A single room with a fireplace, a bench, maybe a table. The watchman might sit for 10 or 15 minutes, warming his hands, before standing up with a sigh and heading back out into the night. One foot in front of the other, down the same streets, past the same buildings. It's remarkable, really. How boring it must have been. Not that there was never any excitement. Sometimes things did happen. A fire might break out, and the watchman would raise the alarm, shouting, "Fire! Fire!" and ringing his bell as loudly as he could. People would stumble from their beds, disoriented and frightened, and form bucket chains to try to put out the flames. Or a watchman might encounter a thief, though usually, as I mentioned earlier, the thief would hear the watchman coming and disappear before any confrontation occurred. Thieves weren't looking for fights. They were looking for unlocked doors and unattended valuables. Occasionally, a watchman might find someone who'd had too much to drink and was lying in the gutter. He'd help them up if they were cooperative and send them on their way, or he'd leave them where they were if they weren't bothering anyone. Medieval watchmen weren't really in the business of arresting drunk people. That would have been a full-time job all by itself. Very occasionally, very occasionally, there might be something more serious. A brawl that spilled out into the street, a robbery, someone calling for help. But most nights were quiet. The watchman walked, he called the hours, he checked the doors and shutters, and nothing was wrong. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, if you could see them through the clouds. The moon crept across the sky, and the night passed, minute by minute, hour by hour. 2 o'clock, and all is well. 3 o'clock, and all is well. There's a record from London in the 1300s of a night watchman named Thomas, who served for 27 years. 27 years of walking the same streets, 27 years of calling the same hours. Approximately 9,855 nights, if he never took a night off. Which he probably did, but still, that's a lot of nights. That's a lot of 1 o'clock, and all is well. The pay was minimal. In London, a night watchman might earn 2 or 3 pence per night. This was enough to live on, but just barely. It wasn't the sort of job that made you wealthy. It was the sort of job that kept you fed and housed. Many night watchmen were older men who couldn't do heavy physical labor anymore, but could still walk and stay alert. Former soldiers, sometimes. Men who were used to keeping watch. In some cities, being a night watchman was something that citizens had to take turns doing. A kind of civic duty. You'd serve for a week or a month, walking the streets at night, and then you'd go back to your regular life as a baker or a blacksmith or a merchant. This system had the advantage that it didn't cost the city any money, but it had the disadvantage that the watchmen weren't necessarily very good at the job, and many of them resented having to do it. There are records of people paying others to take their watch shifts for them, hiring someone to walk the streets in their place so they could stay home and sleep, which rather defeated the purpose. But people have always been creative about avoiding obligations they don't want to fulfill. In other cities, night watching was done by a permanent force of paid watchmen. These men knew the streets well. They knew which buildings were likely to catch fire. They knew where troublemakers might hide. They knew the residents and could tell when someone was somewhere they shouldn't be. These professional night watchmen developed a rhythm to their work, a comfortable routine. Start the shift at dusk. Walk the first round while there's still some light in the sky, just to get your bearings and make sure everything is as it should be. As darkness falls, light your lantern, the warm glow of the flame inside its protective glass. Begin the regular rounds, down this street, up that one, past the church, through the market, along the river. Stop at the watch house to warm your hands. Maybe eat a piece of bread or drink some water. Back out into the night. Keep walking. Keep watching. Call the hours. Let people know you're there. And slowly, the night passes. 4 o'clock, the darkest hour, just before dawn, the time when your body most wants to sleep. The watchman yawns, rubs his eyes, and keeps walking. 5 o'clock. Is that a hint of grey in the eastern sky? Not yet. Keep walking. 6 o'clock. Yes, definitely lighter now. The end of the shift is approaching. Soon the sun will rise, and the day people will wake up and the night will be over. And the watchman can go home, eat something, and sleep while the rest of the world goes about its business. Until dusk comes again, and the whole thing starts over. Night after night after night. Let's move forward now to England in the 1500s and early 1600s. The time of Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I. The time of Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, as it happens, had quite a bit to say about night watchmen. In his play, Much Ado About Nothing, There's a group of watchmen led by characters called Dogberry and Verges. These watchmen are portrayed as, well, let's say they're not the sharpest tools in the shed. They bumble about, misunderstand instructions, use words incorrectly, and generally seem to have no idea what they're doing. And yet, through a combination of luck and being in the right place at the right time, they manage to solve the mystery and catch the villains. It's comedy, of course. Shakespeare was making his audience laugh. But it also tells us something about how night watchmen were viewed in Elizabethan England. They weren't exactly respected. They were often seen as incompetent, elderly, or both. The job of night watchman was frequently given to men who were too old or infirm to do anything else. The instructions given to watchmen in this period were detailed, but not particularly exciting. Here's a real example from the parish records of Elizabethan London. The watch shall walk through the streets from 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. They shall arrest all suspicious persons. They shall call out the hours. They shall look for fires and give warning. They shall assist any person in distress. They shall remain sober and alert at all times. Remain sober and alert at all times. This was apparently enough of a problem that it needed to be specifically mentioned in the official instructions. You can imagine the temptation. It's a cold night. You're walking the same streets you walked last night and the night before. Nothing is happening. Nothing is going to happen. And there's a tavern right there, with warm firelight spilling out through the windows and the sound of laughter inside. Maybe just a quick stop, just to warm up, just one drink. Of course, one drink becomes two, and two becomes three, and before you know it, you're not much of a watchman anymore. The authorities tried to prevent this with rules and penalties. But enforcing those rules was difficult when the people who were supposed to be enforcing them were the very people you were trying to keep in line. In London, the watch was organised by parish. Each parish was responsible for providing watchmen for its own streets. Wealthier parishes could afford to pay men to do the job. Poorer parishes often relied on the system of rotating duty, where residents took turns being the watchman. The equipment was provided by the parish: a lantern, a staff, or halberd. Sometimes a rattle, a wooden noisemaker that could be spun to make a loud, rattling sound to raise an alarm. And sometimes a watchbox. Watchboxes were small wooden structures, just big enough for one person to stand inside. They provided minimal shelter from the weather, a roof overhead and walls on three sides, open in front so the watchman could see out. The watchman would stand in his watchbox at the corner of a street or in a market square, watching the area around him. When it was time to walk his route, he'd leave the watchbox and make his rounds, then return to the shelter of the box. These watchboxes weren't heated. They didn't have benches or chairs. They were just barely enough to keep the worst of the rain off your head and the wind off your back. Standing in a watchbox on a cold winter night must have been desperately uncomfortable. Your feet growing numb, your fingers stiff, your breath coming out in white clouds. But you stayed, because that was the job. The hours crept by. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. In the distance, you might hear the watch from the next parish calling out their hours, their voice echoing down the streets to reach you. And you'd call out your own hours, and your voice would echo to them. A network of voices in the darkness, all across the city, all calling out that everything was fine, everything was well, people could sleep safely. 11 o'clock and all is well, 12 o'clock and all is well. Shakespeare might have made fun of the watch, but the truth is, they served an important function. They were a reassuring presence. They were the ones who stayed awake, so others could sleep soundly. And yes, some of them were elderly. Some of them were incompetent. Some of them probably did sneak off to the tavern when they shouldn't have. But many of them did their jobs, night after night, without complaint and without recognition. They walked their routes. They called their hours. They kept watch over sleeping streets. In the darkness, in the cold, in the rain. Because someone had to. As we move into the 1600s and 1700s, cities are growing larger and more complex. Paris, London, Amsterdam, these are becoming major urban centers with populations in the hundreds of thousands. And with that growth comes a new problem. The streets are getting more crowded. even at night. There are more people, more businesses, more opportunities for crime. The old system of night watchmen, walking around with their lanterns and staffs, is starting to seem inadequate. But it's what they have, so they keep doing it. In Paris, in the early 1660s, a significant innovation occurs. King Louis XIV orders the installation of street lanterns. These aren't electric lights, of course. They're oil lamps, hung from posts or from ropes stretched across the street. They're lit at dusk and extinguished at dawn. This is revolutionary. For the first time in history, city streets are deliberately illuminated. The lanterns don't provide much light by modern standards. Each one creates a small pool of yellowish light, maybe 10 feet in diameter, but that's enough to see by. Enough to walk without stumbling. Enough to make the night a little less dark. The job of lighting these lanterns and maintaining them falls to special workers called lantern lighters or lamp lighters. We'll talk more about them later. For now, what matters is that the night is getting brighter. But the night watchmen are still there, still walking their routes, still calling the hours. Because lanterns don't prevent crime. They don't put out fires. They don't help people who need assistance. They just make it easier to see while you're doing all those things. In London, the watch system continues much as it had before. Each parish provides its own watchman. The quality varies wildly from one area to another. In wealthy parishes, you might have well-paid, competent watchmen who knew their jobs. In poor parishes, you might have whoever was willing to do it for almost no money. There are complaints, many complaints. People write letters to newspapers saying the watch is useless, that criminals operate with impunity, that the watchmen are old and slow and afraid to confront anyone. And there's some truth to that. If you're 65 years old, armed with nothing but a wooden staff, and you encounter a group of young men who are clearly up to no good, you're probably not going to rush in and try to arrest them. You're going to watch from a distance, maybe call out to warn them off. If they don't leave, you might blow your whistle or ring your bell to raise an alarm. But direct confrontation, that's asking a lot of an elderly man with a stick. Still, the watchman walked. Through rain and snow and fog, through the long nights of winter and the short nights of summer. Let's talk about fog for a moment. In cities near water London, Amsterdam, Venice, fog was a common occurrence. Thick, soupy fog that reduced visibility to almost nothing. On foggy nights, the watchman's lantern didn't help much. The light would just reflect off the fog, creating a diffuse glow that made it even harder to see. But the watchman still walked his route. Slowly, carefully, feeling his way along familiar streets, listening more than looking. The sound of footsteps on cobblestones, the creak of a door, a cat yowling somewhere in the darkness. And every hour, calling out, the sound muffled by the fog, but still audible. 1 o'clock, a foggy night, all quiet. People in their beds would hear that call and feel reassured. The watchman is still there, still on duty, still watching over us. In the 1700s, some cities began to experiment with more organized watch systems, hiring watchmen directly rather than relying on parish systems, training them, giving them uniforms. In Dublin, Ireland, a police watch was established in the 1782nd. These weren't quite police as we'd recognize them today, but they were closer. They had uniforms. They carried rattles to raise alarms. They were paid directly by the city. They also walked routes and called hours, just like traditional night watchmen. Some things don't change. The head of this Dublin watch was a man named Alderman Carleton. He took his job very seriously. He established strict rules about sobriety, punctuality, and conduct. The watchmen under his command were to be neat in appearance. They were to know their routes thoroughly. They were to be courteous to citizens, but firm with troublemakers. And they were absolutely, positively, not to fall asleep while on duty. This was apparently a common enough problem that it needed to be specifically addressed. Standing still in the darkness, in the quiet hours before dawn, when everything is peaceful and nothing is happening, it's easy to let your eyes drift closed, just for a moment, just to rest them. And then you're asleep on your feet, or leaning against a wall, head nodding forward. until a supervisor makes a surprise check, or a citizen lodges a complaint, or you wake yourself up with a snore. There are records of watchmen being fined or dismissed for falling asleep on duty. It was considered a serious breach of responsibility. But you can understand the temptation, can't you? Hour after hour of standing or walking slowly in the darkness. The same streets, the same buildings, the same calls. 2 o'clock and all is well. 3 o'clock and all is well. The rhythm of it, the repetition. It's almost hypnotic. Deep breath. Feel your own eyelids getting heavy as we talk about these sleepy watchmen. That's fine. That's expected. Let yourself relax. The watchman had to stay awake, but you don't have to. That's rather the point of this whole exercise, isn't it? We need to take a brief detour here to talk about lamplighters. They're not exactly night watchmen, but they're closely related. They're another group of people who worked while others slept. As I mentioned earlier, street lighting began in a serious way in Paris in the 1660 seconds. Other cities gradually followed. London got street lamps in the early 1700s, Amsterdam, Vienna, street, Petersburg, all adding lamps to their streets. These lamps needed to be lit at dusk and extinguished at dawn, and someone needed to maintain them, filling them with oil, cleaning the glass, replacing wicks. That someone was the lamplighter. The job of a lamplighter was carefully timed and ritualized. As evening approached and the daylight began to fade, the lamplighter would emerge with his ladder and his long lighting pole. This pole had a small flame at the end, usually a small oil lamp, or, later, a gas pilot light. The lamplighter would use it to reach up and light each street lamp. He moved quickly, but methodically, lamp by lamp, street by street. Each lamp took only a few seconds to light, but in a city with thousands of lamps, the whole process could take an hour or more. The lamplighter needed to time it just right. Start too early, and you're wasting oil, lighting lamps when there's still plenty of daylight. Start too late, and the streets are already dark, and people are stumbling around in the gloom. So the lamplighter learned to read the sky, to know when that moment of transition was approaching, when to begin his rounds. And in the morning, he did it all in reverse. Just before dawn, he'd go around extinguishing the lamps, ladder and pole, lamp by lamp, letting the darkness return as the sun prepared to rise. It's rather peaceful, isn't it? The image of a man with a ladder and a long pole, moving through quiet streets, bringing light or taking it away. There was something almost ceremonial about it. The daily transition from day to night and night to day, marked by this figure with his ladder and his flame. In the 1800s, when gas lighting began to replace oil lamps, the job of the lamplighter became a bit easier. Gas lamps could be lit remotely. You didn't need a flame on a pole. You just turned a valve and used a spark to ignite the gas. But the principle remained the same. Every evening, the lamplighter made his rounds, bringing light to the streets, and every morning he extinguished that light as dawn approached. Children would watch for the lamplighter. His appearance meant night was coming. Time to go inside, time for supper, time for bed. In foggy cities like London, the lamplighters performed another service. On particularly foggy nights, the lamps needed special attention. The moisture would affect the flames, making them burn dimmer or even go out. So on foggy nights, the lamplighter might need to make multiple rounds, checking that the lamps were still lit, relighting any that had gone out. A figure moving through the fog, barely visible himself, tending to the small pools of light that were the only thing standing between the city and complete darkness. Eventually, electric lighting would make the lamplighter obsolete. Flip a switch, and all the lights come on at once. No need for a man with a ladder and a pole. But for a couple of centuries, the lamplighter was an essential part of the urban nighttime landscape, a companion to the night watchman in keeping the darkness at bay. We need to take a brief detour here to talk about lamplighters. They're not exactly night watchmen, but they're closely related. They're another group of people who worked while others slept. As I mentioned earlier, street lighting began in a serious way in Paris in the 1660 seconds. Other cities gradually followed. London got street lamps in the early 1700s. Amsterdam, Vienna, Street, Petersburg, all adding lamps to their streets. These lamps needed to be lit at dusk and extinguished at dawn. And someone needed to maintain them, filling them with oil, cleaning the glass, replacing wicks. That someone was the lamplighter. The job of a lamplighter was carefully timed and ritualized. As evening approached and the daylight began to fade, the lamplighter would emerge with his ladder and his long lighting pole. This pole had a small flame at the end, usually a small oil lamp, or later, a gas pilot light. The lamplighter would use it to reach up and light each street lamp. He moved quickly but methodically, lamp by lamp, street by street. Each lamp took only a few seconds to light, but in a city with thousands of lamps, the whole process could take an hour or more. The lamplighter needed to time it just right. Start too early and you're wasting oil, lighting lamps when there's still plenty of daylight. Start too late and the streets are already dark, and people are stumbling around in the gloom. So the lamplighter learned to read the sky, to know when that moment of transition was approaching, when to begin his rounds. And in the morning, he did it all in reverse. Just before dawn, he'd go around extinguishing the lamps, ladder and pole, lamp by lamp, letting the darkness return as the sun prepared to rise. It's rather peaceful, isn't it? The image of a man with a ladder and a long pole, moving through quiet streets, bringing light or taking it away. There was something almost ceremonial about it. The daily transition from day to night and night to day, marked by this figure with his ladder and his flame. In the 1800s, when gas lighting began to replace oil lamps, the job of the lamplighter became a bit easier. Gas lamps could be lit remotely. You didn't need a flame on a pole. You just turned a valve and used a spark to ignite the gas. But the principle remained the same. Every evening, the lamplighter made his rounds, bringing light to the streets, and every morning he extinguished that light as dawn approached. Children would watch for the lamplighter. His appearance meant night was coming. Time to go inside, time for supper, time for bed. In foggy cities like London, the lamplighters performed another service. On particularly foggy nights, the lamps needed special attention. The moisture would affect the flames, making them burn dimmer or even go out. So on foggy nights, the lamplighter might need to make multiple rounds, checking that the lamps were still lit, relighting any that had gone out. A figure moving through the fog, barely visible himself, tending to the small pools of light that were the only thing standing between the city and complete darkness. Eventually, electric lighting would make the lamplighter obsolete. Flip a switch, and all the lights come on at once. No need for a man with a ladder and a pole. But for a couple of centuries, the lamplighter was an essential part of the urban nighttime landscape, a companion to the night watchman in keeping the darkness at bay. So what replaced the night watchman? Police, primarily. Professional law enforcement that works around the clock. But also, in a way, technology. Electric street lighting made the night less dark and therefore less dangerous. Telephones meant you could call for help rather than hoping a watchman happened to be nearby. Alarm systems, locks, security cameras, all the things we take for granted now, but which didn't exist for most of human history. The night isn't as frightening as it used to be. We walk through well-lit streets without thinking about it. We can see where we're going. We have phones in our pockets if we need them. But there are still people who work the night shift. Security guards, police officers, hospital staff, factory workers. People who are awake while most of the world sleeps. In a way, they're the modern descendants of the night watchmen. They're keeping watch over us, in one way or another. Security guards, especially, have a lot in common with the old night watchmen. They patrol buildings or neighborhoods. They check that doors are locked. They watch for anything unusual. Most of the time, nothing happens, which is, as always, the point. They sit at desks or walk through quiet hallways. The same routes, night after night. The same checks, hour after hour. Different technology, same basic job. Stay awake, pay attention, be there in case something goes wrong. and hope that nothing does. So we've walked through history with the night watchman, from ancient Rome to the Victorian era, thousands of years of people staying awake while others slept. What have we learned? Perhaps that the night has always been something that made people uneasy. The darkness, the vulnerability of sleep, the fear of what might happen when we're not aware. And that throughout history, societies have dealt with that fear in the same basic way. Have someone stay alert. Have someone keep watch. Have someone walk through the darkness, checking that everything is as it should be. The details varied. The tools changed. Oil lamps became gas lamps, became electric lights. Staffs and halberds became truncheons, became radios and phones. But the fundamental idea remained the same. Someone is awake. Someone is watching. You can sleep safely. And the night watchman walked and called the hours, and most of the time, nothing happened. Which was exactly what everyone wanted. 1 o'clock and all is well. 2 o'clock and all is well. A voice in the darkness, reassuring sleeping citizens that they could continue sleeping. That nothing was wrong. That someone was on duty. Think about that for a moment. Thousands of years of people walking through the night, calling out to sleeping strangers. All is well. All is well. All is well. It's a peaceful thought, isn't it? Right now, as you listen to this, there are people out there who are working while you rest. Security guards making their rounds, police officers patrolling streets, doctors and nurses in hospitals. All of them keeping watch in their own way. So you don't have to. So you can close your eyes. So you can let your breathing slow. So you can drift off, knowing that someone, somewhere, is alert. All is well. Everything is fine. Sleep peacefully. The night watchmen have it covered. They always have. Good night.